Okay, we'll see if anyone else joins. I'll let them in as they pop up on the list here. Welcome everyone to Rehumanizing Mathematics, why it is needed and what it means in the context of the Excel Center. I'm your host, Joshua Britton. Joining me today and who's leading this presentation is Anna Louise. We ask that you please ask any questions in the chat feature, and towards the end, we may open it up to like voice chat, but it just depends on how time goes. There is a hard stop at 11 o'clock, so we'll try and get this train going. At this time, I'm going to pass it along to Anna.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for signing up for my session. My name is Anna Louise. I am the lead teacher at the Excel Center Meadows. I have been working for the Excel Center since 2012. I started at the Michigan Street location, and then I moved to Shelbyville, and then now I'm here in the Meadows. In addition to lead teaching, I am a mathematics teacher, so I teach everything from Math Lab on up. And I am also a doctoral candidate at IUPUI in the Urban Education Studies program. So I am working on my dissertation currently, and I am focusing my research on what the kind of research defines as stop-outs, which are students that have discontinued high school that are coming back. So our Excel Center students are all stop-outs, and they're basically their experiences in math classrooms and the construction of who they are as mathematics learners, which we call their mathematics identities. So I've been working a lot on just kind of doing research in this area and found a lot of things that I thought might be helpful to share with other mathematics teachers in our network that I wanted to kind of share with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I have, can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So I have a little bit of a do now here for you. So if you could kind of just take a look at this student's work. You don't need to write anything down in the chat or unmute, but just take a look at the student's work and see if you could identify a couple things for me. One, what was the kind of mistake that the student made in order to get this problem incorrect? And if you could just kind of think about what was the misconception that the student had that led to that mistake. I'll give you guys maybe just about a minute or so to do that. If you want to just take kind of a note on whatever's in front of you, just kind of think about if you could identify that. Does anybody need more time? Okay, great. So we're not going to talk about this yet. We're going to revisit this kind of later on in the session. But if you could just go ahead and kind of keep for yourself so that you can reference back, kind of so that when we bring it back up, you remember, and I'll bring this picture back up for you. Okay. So we are going to use the chat feature now. Before I kind of dive into what the research says that rehumanizing mathematics means and what kind of I've come to understand it to be, I would just love to get kind of an understanding of coming into this session. You know, obviously that term sparked your interest for whatever reason. What do you think, or what have you come to know rehumanizing mathematics to mean? So if you want to just take a second and type in the chat feature, as you guys are kind of typing, I'll kind of share what people are coming up with so we can kind of see coming in, what is our level of understanding of what this actually means. Okay, so we have making math relevant, connecting math to students' everyday lives, making relevant to other subjects, making it more applicable to helping students feel better about themselves and their ability to do math, making math more relatable and applicable, making mathematics real, seeing the person and their issues rather than just the operations, putting math into students' everyday lives, again, making it relatable, making math more friendly, relevant, accessible. Okay, great. So it looks like you guys already have a pretty decent understanding of what rehumanizing mathematics means. And I would fully expect that, because I think that in general at the Excel Center, this is something that we really strive to do across all disciplines. When we think about rehumanizing mathematics, Gutierrez, who is a prevalent math researcher, says that math should provide both windows and mirrors into the world, and that you're doing that through mathematics. So when you think of a mirror, obviously the first thing you see is yourself, right? So rehumanizing mathematics, the students should always see themselves through the math, right? Windows allow you to see the world around you, right? So rehumanizing should allow students to both see themselves and find new ways to see the world, okay? Rehumanizing math seeks to decouple mathematics with wealth, domination, compliance, right? So we know that some of the wealthiest jobs that you can get in our country require a great deal of mathematics understanding, right? In order to make good money, oftentimes you need a great deal of mathematics understanding. So math is coupled to wealth. Mathematics is also coupled to domination, right? With wealth comes power. And also compliance, right? We see mathematics as a discipline where there's a set of rules to follow, and if you follow them well, that you can come to the right answer, okay? So we're seeking through rehumanizing it to decouple it with that and recouple it with joy, with connection, with belonging, right? We want students to feel encouraged to express themselves through the practice of mathematics, and to be able to draw on a sense of aesthetics and intuition, right? In ways that are pleasing to them. So we want to be able to help them to feel more human, more whole, but also more joyful and more connected when we think about mathematics. Why is this important, right? Well, a lot of your definitions connected rehumanizing mathematics with identity. So identity in mathematics and learning mathematics are very connected, right? So identity definitely means who the student is, right? Their race, their age, their gender, their experiences. But specifically mathematics identity hones in on who the student is in the context of learning math, right? So their ability to perform mathematical problems, their understanding of the importance of mathematics or their value for mathematics, different opportunities and constraints that are given to them within the mathematics context, and the resulting motivation, right? We all know very well at the Excel Center that students' motivation to learn math is directly connected to their feelings of whether or not they can be successful, right? And so in order for students to be able to be successful, they have to feel not only connected, but also empowered, right? So all of this is constructed through their socialization, right? Their socialization with you as their teachers, their socialization with each others, and also their socialization with society at whole. It's really, really important for us, and specifically in the context of the Excel Center, to rehumanize mathematics for our students, because without doing it, they can't be successful, right? We know that we are welcoming in our doors students who have endured a lot of trauma, a lot of silencing, a lot of erasing of who they are. And that is part of why many of them disconnected from school originally, right? They didn't feel like they belonged. They didn't feel whole. They didn't feel supported. They didn't feel valued. And that's not every single student's story, but many of our students come to us in this state, right? So our job is not just to remediate them, right? Our job is not just to fill in the academic blanks or holes or gaps that we see, but it's to help them feel more human, to help them feel more connected, right? Because without that, then they're just being compliant, right? And rehumanizing seeks to help them feel connected versus compliant. So it's kind of a no-brainer why this is necessary, especially in our context. The big question is, how do we do it, right? And there's a very specific reason why this session is entitled Rehumanizing and not Equitable Mathematics Instruction, right? I'm sure many of you have heard lots and lots of terminologies around, we need equity in education, we need equitable instruction, we need culturally relevant pedagogy, all of those buzzwords, right? But there's a very specific reason why I'm emphasizing rehumanizing and not equity. One is because rehumanizing is a verb and not a noun, right? It is a process in which we go through every day, every term, and throughout time, right? There's not going to be in this session, and I'm so sorry to disappoint, I'm not going to give you like the 5 steps to rehumanizing your classroom and then boom, you're good, right? Because rehumanizing is a process. It's not going to happen because you do this, this, and this in your do now, or because you do this, this, and this in your assessment. Rehumanizing really involves teachers interrogating their practices, their mindsets, and their own identities, and then how those practices build knowledge for students, right? What tasks are you assigning to students that help rehumanize your classroom? Who are your students? What are the contributions that they bring from their own culture, from their own environment, from their own identity? And what are their capabilities coming in, and how do you see them as capable in growing as mathematics learners? So rehumanizing is not necessarily equity. Obviously, we want equitable classrooms, but rehumanizing is more thinking about how do we get back to the original humanizing of math, right? So it's called rehumanizing and not just humanizing because mathematics has been a human practice since the beginning of time. It's been embedded in our cultures, in our ancestors, in our histories. And so this practice involves us revisiting and re-bringing that in because schools have silenced, damaged, erased the human aspect of mathematics for a long time, right? Oftentimes nowadays in schools, the people who are most successful in mathematics are those who have the fastest working memories, the highest level of compliance, the best ability to follow directions without question, right? And memorization, right? So it's not necessarily a practice at this moment in which we are really encouraging the human aspect. So rehumanizing asks us to come back to that, okay? And I really encourage you to ask yourselves, especially in your consideration of joining this session, are you just doing this to kind of serve as a hook? Are you just doing this so that your test scores improve? Are you just doing this so that you get more students passing? Or is there really deep down a desire to help your students feel more human as in the process of their learning? Okay, so we want to kind of question that and interrogate that, which is why rehumanizing is a verb and not a noun. So let's go back to this problem that we kind of looked at in our do now, okay? And a couple people typed in the chat, but I'm sure a lot of you saw that when the student cross-multiplied, instead of multiplying 4 and 2, they added 4 and 2. Okay, and in our teaching rubric, actually at the Excel Center, anticipating misconceptions is something that is considered highly effective in our classrooms, okay? Now, this is the difference between equity and rehumanizing, right? Equity says, let's make sure we anticipate everything that students might get wrong or they might do. Let's not make them feel bad about it, but then let's show them the right path, right? That in itself creates a huge imbalance of power, because whether or not you realize it, what you are assuming is that the student has made a mistake and they have a misconception, okay? Misconception as a word in general is actually pretty dehumanizing to students, because what it implies is that their thinking, their thought process is wrong, right? The way they thought about it wasn't correct. Their answer wasn't correct. And this is why our students get so incredibly deflated in math classrooms, right? You see, I'm sure all of you, your students that come in, they're so afraid to make mistakes. They're so afraid to take a wrong step, sometimes cripplingly so, right? They don't even allow themselves to try because they're so incredibly scared, right? Mistakes have become this like thing that they're so afraid of, right? And part of that is because of this rhetoric, right? Because as math teachers, we're trained to zero in on what they've done, figure out what the problem was, and then give them the right solution. That in itself is dehumanizing, right? And it doesn't mean that there's any ill intent, right? Math teachers, when doing that, only have the intention of helping their students, understand, of giving their students an ability to have a path to the right answer. But it's dehumanizing because it doesn't necessarily allow you to consider and to value the conceptions, right? So if you're taking a stance of rehumanizing, you actually are going to approach your classroom in a way that says, you don't believe in misconceptions, only conceptions. Students don't have misconceptions. They have conceptions, right? They have thoughts, they have processes, they have certain ways of knowing. Now, do those ways of knowing always work mathematically? No, okay? So this doesn't mean that every answer now becomes right or every answer now becomes correct. What this means is that we value, we honor what the student was thinking in the first place. So let's kind of look at how this reverses, right? So the way that I worded this do now for you was very intentional. I said, what was the mistake the students made? What was the misconception? And probably that wasn't alarming to any of you, the way that I worded that, right? Because that's how we've been trained to think, both as mathematics students, as mathematics teachers. As you were looking at it, my do now probably didn't send off any red flags for you, right? Probably some of you were like, ooh, let me see, okay, right? Because for many math teachers, that's the intrigue, right? That's the kind of exciting part, is like, okay, what happened with this problem, right? But when we're thinking about rehumanizing the classroom, we want to be intrigued with what were they thinking that was right? What were they thinking that we can build from, right? So instead now, let's look at this problem and let's think, why would it make sense for the student to have thought this way? And if anyone wants to jump in the chat with any thoughts, feel free. What are the conceptions that the student had while completing this problem? So not the misconceptions, but what were the conceptions, right? Why would what the student did make sense? So students said they were correct on the right side of the problem, so they may have been rushing, okay? We all have accidentally mixed up multiplication and addition, making students realize, okay, sorry, that was an answer to the one before. Right, so the student had a conception, right? It would make sense for them to add 4 and 2 because what do they see in the problem? The addition sign, right? So that shows you the student understands that that symbol means to add, right? So that's a conception. Now, in this particular problem, if they continue to do that, it will not align with mathematical truth and reasoning, but that was a conception, right? So approaching this student and saying, oh, wow, you really paid attention to the symbols in this problem. I see that you added 4 and 2. I can totally see why that would make sense. That was very observant of you, right? I can see that when you were thinking about that, you know, you saw 4 plus 2 and it made 6. Now, the question is, will this work for you every time? If you take that 3 and you plug it back into the problem, will it still make sense, right? And allowing the student to take some of that discovery and say, oh, wow, there's an equal sign, right? So if they're valuing symbols, they value the plus sign, they also need to kind of value that equal sign. It's not going to give you 2 equal ratios, right? So allowing the student to kind of understand that when they're getting a problem and you're guiding them, they have conceptions and they have things that you want to honor, right? Versus just what the mistake or what the misconception might have been. Okay. In the research, there are 8 dimensions of what you can do in your classrooms to rehumanize mathematics. And we will not have time to like dig into what each of one of these really means and to, you know, really consider all of the different things that you are going to do in your classroom differently now. What I want to kind of do is present these to you and get you started thinking about 2 things. What is going on in your classroom in which you're already doing this? Because I believe every single one of you has many aspects of your classroom that are extremely humanizing, right? If you didn't, you probably wouldn't be able to survive at the Excel Center long, right? Because our model and our student population require a level of humanizing education. So you are all already doing many things that are rehumanizing your students. What we want to think about is, where are the areas that maybe we need to rethink? Where are the areas that maybe we need to interrogate? Where are the areas that maybe we need to kind of investigate? So the 8 dimensions kind of include participation and positioning, which is recognizing the hierarchies in the classroom and in society, and kind of shifting the role of authority from the teacher to the student, right? And we've kind of heard a lot about that, I'm sure, in PDs and in kind of mathematics research, but really shifting the balance of power from the teacher to the student, and also really encouraging students to work with each other rather than seek your approval, right? One really big thing we see in Excel Center classrooms all the time is, did I get this right? Did I get this right? Can you come check and see if this is right, right? That's that kind of students' previous experience in math classrooms of, I need to check in with my teacher. I need my teacher's approval. I need my teacher's evaluation, right? Versus their own and their peers, okay? Cultures and histories. This one is on our rubric. It's been prioritized in the kind of redoing of the rubric. And I know many math teachers have come to me and said, how do you do this? How does this look, right? And it's just intentional planning and shifting of kind of what we prioritize in our classroom, but acknowledging not only students' funds of knowledge, but also their culture, right? Are they from another country where they have a different algorithm for solving it? Several of you that teach at sites that have lots and lots of students from other countries, they may have a completely different way of solving that, and honoring that and allowing them to do that, right? Incorporating the history of mathematics that allows students to see themselves, right? So if you serve a majority Latinx population, trying to provide for them that the history that is aligned with their culture, right? If you serve a community that's not represented in the history, it is very difficult for them to see that mirror, right? Remember the mirrors in the windows, okay? Allowing them to reconnect with their own histories and the roots of where mathematics comes from, which does not just include white men, right? Another thing that's really important is that if your student does not speak English as a native language, allowing them to speak another language in the classroom as they're problem solving. There's a really oppressive rhetoric that says students need to be practicing their English, right? If a student is speaking their language, they're not getting enough English practice. Believe me, they're saturated in English. They're getting plenty of practice. If they want to speak math and speak a different language in their math classroom, it's not going to inhibit their learning. So going back to the windows and mirrors concept again, so learning these cultures and histories opens the door for students to be able to see both those windows and mirrors, see themselves in the curriculum, and also a new way of viewing the world, right? Additionally, we want to really encourage students, just like we did with that misconceptions, to turn their attention from critiquing to appreciating, right? So as we are encouraging them to work with each other, helping them to appreciate the thought processes and the kind of conceptions that other students have rather than critiquing, right? So all those problems that used to be on the ECA that we have in our classrooms of this student made a mistake, highlight the mistake, right? Doing the same thing with them and thinking about how to help them learn how to kind of reconfigure how they look at that, right? Because they've been in math classrooms just like we have, where they've been encouraged to look at the mistakes, right? This next one is probably one of the most difficult, right? Because mathematics curriculum has been so disconnected from our real lives. And almost every single one of you, when we talked about rehumanizing, said, connecting it back to what they have to do, connecting it, making it relatable, right? Because we know this is so absent, right? But making it a living practice is part of rehumanizing it, right? Seeing mathematics as something that's in motion, seeing mathematics as something that is part of their lives, part of the everyday things, and it's a living practice, and it's not just for school, and it's not just for earning credentials. One great example is, if you serve students that get their hair braided. Oftentimes when people braid their hair, there's all these intricate patterns and beautiful kind of different ways that people do it. That's math. Right? Maybe they don't sit down and calculate the curve, right, on paper, but there is a level of calculation that has to go into when you're parting your hair and thinking about, okay, if I want this to go in this direction, then this one is going to have to kind of be a little smaller or a little bit over here. That's math, right? How many of our students know how to do that very well, right? And honoring that as a mathematical practice, not just as a part of their lives, but showing how those types of things connect, right? Another one is dance, right? So many of our students love music and dance. Both music and dance have so many mathematical elements, right? So thinking about some of these things that are part of their everyday lives that can indeed connect with mathematics that maybe students have never considered. Looking at kind of the next couple, creation. So encouraging students to think of new ways to do the math, not just mimic the way that is most efficient or the way that you learned or the way that you presented it, but really think about creating their own ways and their own values, not just reproduction. Broadening mathematics. So thinking about, we of course require algebra and geometry and algebra 2, but incorporating other forms of math and helping students see that really any type of quantitative aspect of our world is math, right? This is one thing I think Excel Center teachers do really well, is attending to their body and their emotions, right? We know most of us are kind of counselors first and teachers second, right? So inviting students to be able to draw from themselves, be in tune with themselves, how they feel, what they think, and honoring those things. And lastly, taking ownership. Okay, students view mathematics as something that they do for themselves, not just for the diploma, not just for you, not just so they can get this credential, but a way of learning so that they can incorporate it into their play, into their invention, into the ways that they express themselves. And this is really important because this is where we're going to stem that what stems from it is that willingness to grapple with problems longer, right? That's another thing that Excel Center teachers really struggle with our students, is that we really struggle to encourage students to sit with a problem, right? Oftentimes we present it to them, and as soon as they see more than like 6 numbers, they're like, okay, nope, I can't do this. Too much, right? Maybe even less than 6, right? But the more that you help them take ownership, the more that you support that, is going to allow them to kind of push deeper into having that endurance, right? So what I would like to do before we kind of wrap up is kind of ask you guys to think about, how does this information make you think about, oh, sorry, typo, what you are currently doing in your classrooms, right? Because I know that you're currently doing a lot of humanizing things already. So what have you heard today that you're like, great, I do that. Awesome, I'll keep doing it, right? And what are the things that you have heard that you're like, oh, I don't do that at all, or I haven't even thought about that. I'd like to kind of dig into that some more. So Josh is going to break you guys up into some breakout sessions to kind of talk. Looking at the time, I would say let's take about 5 minutes to kind of break into groups of 3 or 4 and kind of grapple with this question. And then when we come back together, we will kind of share out from each group kind of what you guys came up with.
Here we go. Most everybody.
Hi again.
Is it just us?
We're over. We're the only ones that left our room.
I'll pull everyone back here in another minute.
Now they're starting to come in.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Kind of as we're wrapping up, I would just love to hear, and you guys can just go unmuted to do this. In your groups, I would love to hear kind of some of the things that you feel like you're doing really well with this. And if anybody has kind of something that they'd love to learn more about or love to improve, you can share that too. But maybe just one or two groups, if you'd be willing to share kind of what you guys discussed.
Well, I'll say something. In our group, we all thought having them help each other at the board and going to the board was definitely a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just unmuted. One of the things our group talked about was having our do nows a problem that's already solved, that's got an incorrect step in it, or maybe two, and they have to go through and their do now is to collaborate together to find the errors and then talk about it and talk about possible remedies.
I had a couple a couple English teachers in my group, and we talked about there was a similarity between the math and science. In fact, that they teach punctuation, and sometimes the punctuation isn't there. They have to explain that the symbols that aren't there sometimes are more important than what is there, and try to bring that back in so they don't miss what's not there rather than what is there.
Awesome. Maybe we have time for maybe one more.
In our group, we talked about allowing students to remember back to other methods that they have learned previously, especially if they're from other countries, and that as long as they're doing valid methods that, you know, solve the problem, that's valuing and honoring like the learning that they have done previously, and then connecting to a real life experience. And so making simple coffee, donuts, things like that is a part of the math to make it less scary and intimidating. And so they lean into it more.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful article called The Whiteness of Mathematics that's you can Google and read online, and it has some excellent ideas and lists a whole lot of mathematicians outside of our culture. That was good, but it's called The Whiteness of Mathematics.
Okay, that'd be great. I'm going to send the PowerPoint out to everyone so you have it. And then in that email, if you wouldn't mind, Velma, maybe if you have access to it, attaching it so people could have access to it.
Okay, now in an email?
Well, I'm going to email everybody in this.
Okay, yes.
In this group who came, I'm going to email the PowerPoint out. So maybe if you could just reply all and attach that, that'd be great.
Okay, it's a long article, but it's well worth it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would love that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And just see if there are any questions that anyone has for me, or maybe even for each other, kind of about this concept, or anything that might have been confusing or you were unsure of?
One thing that is on my mind, and I've mentioned it when I'm teaching algebra and solving for a variable, there's a lot of different approaches. Like when it comes to two-step or multi-step, there's a lot of different places you can start, but still get to the same answer. But I'm having a hard time connecting that to other math. Like a lot of times I just have one approach I show on the board and we just do examples of that over and over again. But I want to try and encourage different approaches, just like I do in solving for a variable, but I'm struggling to understand how to do that.
Like different approaches? Is there any particular like concept that you would give an example of? It might be helpful for people to know, like so what's something that maybe you teach that you feel like you don't do?
I do Math B and I'm teaching Algebra 1. I can't think of a concept off the top of my head right now, unfortunately. I'm kind of thinking outside of algebra. Sorry.
Well, part of this, and this is kind of maybe not as specific of an answer as you would like, but part of that is because the way that we have learned math has been also extremely dehumanizing. And so every single one of us that is teaching math is seeking to teach in a way that we did not learn, right? Unless you had this like amazing, crazy experience, which maybe some of you have, but for the most part, most of us went to traditional schools, and we were taught in a way that was very dehumanizing. Our humanity was not, you probably very much valued. And I don't mean that your teachers were mean to you. I mean that you were probably taught in a way where like, this is how you solve this, and this is what you do, and this is how you solve this, and this is what you do. So from the teacher perspective, it is extremely difficult because you're also deconditioning yourself while you are trying to help your students decondition, and while you're trying to provide this environment that allows for multiple ways of thinking, right? So you haven't really probably even been taught multiple ways of doing many things, right? You've just been somebody who's been lucky that your learning style and the ways that you kind of grasp material was aligned with the way that the system taught you, right? So I think that probably the best thing to do is one, maybe research how those kinds of things are done in other countries. I think Nicole brought up that oftentimes she has students that come from other places and they have a completely different way of doing it. And I don't know, you'll have to, agree or disagree, Nicole, but I'm sure that some of the ways that students do it, Nicole may not understand completely because she's like, I've never seen that before, right? But she allows the space for it, right? But maybe she's not in a place yet where she could actually teach that other way, right? And I don't want the rehumanizing aspect to get reduced to, you have to teach students 3 different ways how to do every problem, and that's rehumanizing, right? Because that's not necessarily what it is, right? Allowing students to build off of what they know and to be authentically themselves in whatever capacity that is what rehumanizing is, right? Honoring their identities. And so I have students that say, I really like the way that you showed me and I want to do that. That doesn't mean that I'm dehumanizing them necessarily, right? But we want to help them understand that there are multiple ways of doing it, but they don't necessarily have to do it multiple ways in order to reach this full humanity in mathematics, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say your focus needs to be on, I got to show them all these different ways. They just need to understand that there are different ways and get comfortable with that and feel that if they have a different way, you're not going to force them to do it your way because your way is the right way, or to force, but I was going to kind of let everyone know that I actually don't feel like I've done this topic much justice, right? I only had 50 minutes and I gave you the highlights of what's out there, but these are really deep conversations to be having. And we could spend all year just talking about one of these 8 dimensions, several years, right? So what I'm going to offer you is an opportunity, and everyone here, an opportunity to kind of come back together throughout the school year and have these discussions, right? Because like I said, rehumanizing is a verb, it's a process, and it starts with the way that you think, right? You first have to interrogate, how do you think about math? And how do your students think about math? And so I would love to continue these conversations together. And then we can bring up more specific classroom instances or more specific lessons. And because I haven't necessarily given you a 1, 2, 3, go process, right? Because that's not what this is. And term 1, you may have a group of students, and term 3, you may have a different group of students, and this may look completely different for each of those groups, because if we're trying to honor the identities of your students, who they are changes how we do this, right? So I'd love, Lindsay, for you and anyone else, and if you have other math teachers at your schools that didn't sign up for this, that you think they'd be interested, I'm going to offer, time for us to come together. Maybe we'll read some of these things, possibly Valma's article and some other things, and continue this conversation, because it has to be an ongoing conversation in order to do this well. I don't know if that helps, but.
There's about 3 minutes left before we have to come to a hard stop at 11.
Okay, sure. I'm just checking the chat really quick to see if anyone else had questions. I don't see any. Thank you, you guys are very sweet. So I have some recommended readings for you. Both of these are done by researchers that have devoted their entire careers to looking into this. The one on the left, Mathematics, Teaching, Learning, and Liberation in the Lives of Black Children by Danny Beard Martin, is a great read, but I would encourage you to read any and everything that this man has written. He is phenomenal. He does focus on Black students, but his practices are humanizing and they can be applied to any students of any identity. He is amazing. So this would be a great book to look up. It's actually fairly short, and I actually have a PDF version of it that I can attach in the email. And the other one on the right is kind of more of a collection. NCTM, or the National Council of Mathematics, or Teachers of Mathematics, published it, and it has contributions from a lot of different authors. One of them is Gutierrez, who came up with the 8 kind of conceptions of rehumanizing mathematics. So these are both great places to start if you just want to continue the learning. And then, like I said, I will be emailing all of you the PowerPoint that I used today, which also has my resources here, kind of the things that I have read and that I've drawn from in doing this. But I would love to continue the conversation with as many people as are interested. We can kind of get together over Zoom, maybe once a term or once or twice a term, and kind of talk through some of these things in more depth, because like I said, it has to be a continued conversation. So thank you so much for coming to my session. You guys were great. I appreciate it. I know 50 minutes is really hard to cover something this vast, but I appreciate you guys being willing just to kind of hear and be open to it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, you too.
Bye.